Hey guys, welcome to a bit different of a video. You'll notice that I'm on thisissand.com if you remember this, and this is just because I want something in the background while I'm talking, but we'll get into that in a moment once I actually sort of get past this intro. This is actually sort of the type of video that I wanted to make from the beginning on my channel. This is actually why I called myself the introspective thinker, because I wanted to make videos about, just sort of oh my God, that's a good start. Uh, Philosophical ideas, hypothetically, maybe going into some political things, but I always wanted to do it in a way that didn't, I don't know, discourage people from watching because the issue with sort of more, I don't want to necessarily say ideological content, is you're always going to push some people away and you're eventually probably going to construct an echo chamber, and I don't really want that. So my goal with videos like this is to mostly just have a discussion and like work through an idea, and you guys get to come along and listen, and then you can give feedback in your comments. I really am asking that if we that you guys have nice comments and be very respectful to each other. And if I say something really dumb, you can call me out. Just like try and be nice about it, because that's the thing. I'm not trying to make objective claims about the truth in these types of videos where I'm just thinking. I just want to think through a problem out loud. And so in this video, we're going to discuss skepticism. And in the background, I'm just going to be, let me change up this palette real fast. I really used to like this website. Oh, I clicked the wrong color. Okay, that's good. And so you can sort of just make Sam. But anyway, we're going to be discussing skepticism. So if you want, you can sort of just minimize this, listen to it in the background, sort of like a podcast. But so, what exactly like is skepticism? Because I think, in my opinion, a lot of people sort of misunderstand the point of skepticism. So obviously, it's pretty important to be skeptical of, authorities and claims that you hear because, well, why? Because claims are not inherently true just because somebody says them or thinks of them. I mean, that's a problem we all often run into is we think of an idea and we don't actually question if it's right or not. But just because an idea pops in our heads doesn't mean it's right, which is exactly the type of reason for a video like this, where I need to just discuss these ideas and then like work them and see how sort of like valid they are. But I think to a lot of people, skepticism means assuming that a claim is false if there is no evidence for that claim. And if you're talking like purely, right? If you're talking about this pure sort of intellectual world where all information's available, then I think you're right. If you have access to all possible evidence and there is no evidence, then a claim is false. But I don't really think that works very well in the real world. And it's the issue with presuming that a claim is false is that, well, like, what do you mean by having the evidence? Does it mean that you know all possible evidence for a claim? Like you've looked on like at all the possible information in the universe and you know for a fact there is no evidence to support a claim. Is that really how we sort of think about things in the real world? Because to me, it's a lot more like we all have jobs and we all have things we have to spend time doing, and we don't have time to sort of look into things. But not having time to look into something doesn't mean there isn't evidence. It just means you don't have time to look at evidence. And so a more pragmatic view of skepticism is you need to be skeptical because you don't have the time to look into everything. You can't verify every single claim that you have. So what you need to do is remain neutral when you don't have enough information. I think that's the more scientific thing to do. Rather than assume that a claim is false, you just don't have an assumption on the claim at all. You don't make an opinion without evidence. I think think about, for example, in mathematics, right? If you have a conjecture which has not been proven or disproven, you don't assume that the conjecture is false just because it hasn't been proven or disproven, meaning there's no evidence to support it because it hasn't been proven. you don't assume that the conjecture is false. You just don't have an opinion on it because it hasn't been proven or disproven. Of course, it's a bit challenging trying to compare mathematical logic to sort of real world arguments, because in the real world, there's too many implicit assumptions, too many hidden assumptions and variables, and it's hard to always keep track of things. But for example, what if there's just something that is so hard to find evidence for? For example, the number 2. Not speaking mathematically, but in sort of the real world. Do numbers exist? Like, are numbers real? Because I think they are, and you can sort of see them everywhere. That's not like a rigorous evidence-based like mindset. Like, how do you prove in the real world, not mathematically, how would you like scientifically show that a number exists? Like, does that question even make sense? Because numbers are like concepts, and concepts exist, but what's the evidence for a concept other than the fact that people conceptualize them? Do numbers exist simply because we conceptualize them? Is that where the evidence is? But that's not materialistic. If you wanted to apply a materialistic view in the way that a lot of people who claim to be skeptical would want to, there isn't material evidence that the number 2 exists. There is no evidence. So would you then assume that it doesn't exist? Well, where would you be in science and math if you assumed that numbers don't exist? So I think it's really challenging. Like, how do you rigorously show that time exists, for example, or that space exists? You can show that if you assume it exists, there's consequences that make sense, but to try and like prove something that foundational is pretty much impossible, which is why mathematics isn't founded on proofs, it's founded on assumptions, things we just have to take for granted because you just cannot prove everything. You need to start from a place of assumption. And so if you apply this skepticism of, without evidence, a claim is false, then every axiom of mathematics, which is asserted without evidence, is false. And then mathematics is false. And then what do you have once mathematics is false? You don't have physics, you don't have chemistry, you have no sciences, you don't have computation, you don't have computers. And that's objectively not accurate to describe the world, right? Because these things work in the real world, whatever the real world is. So perhaps the problem is that view of skepticism rather than, mathematics, as an example. Just because you can't prove it, just because you can't. But also, is there a distinction between mathematically proving something and finding evidence for it? But like, in my opinion, all we can really do pragmatically is sort of remain neutral on claims that we don't have evidence for. And you can also look at other logical fallacies, right? Things like appeal to authority. Yes, just because an authority says it does not mean it is true. But in our pragmatic day-to-day, we can't handle all information. So what we have to say is, well, it doesn't mean it's true, but perhaps it means there's a higher probability of it being true because they've spent more time studying it. So for example, you should be skeptical of an authority, but you should be more skeptical of somebody who isn't an authority, because the authority is more likely to be correct because they're an authority. It doesn't mean that they are correct, it just means they're more likely to be. And unfortunately, since we don't have infinite time to study every single concept in the universe, you sometimes have to just take authorities at their word, because otherwise you would never have an opinion on anything. You know what I mean? Like, it's sort of hard to explain if you're not really in agreement with me. I'm not really sure where else to take this video now, though. I do really like the sand. Perhaps we can just take a look at this for a moment. Look at these colors. But we should all be skeptical. We should be skeptical, especially of authorities. And by authority in this case, I primarily mean like government authorities, corporate authorities. But I suppose you should be, I did say before, you should be more skeptical of somebody who isn't an authority, but it's almost like there's a level of the level of skepticism raises for somebody who isn't an authority because they don't know what they're talking about. But then equally, the level of skepticism raises for an authority because they know enough to perhaps intentionally misguide you. Or perhaps they're so arrogant in their knowledge that they unintentionally misguide you. And so perhaps you should just be equally skeptical of all claims. But it also really depends on the importance, right? Something else we have to do pragmatically is determine how important is a claim. Like if somebody says something really dumb, like there's a cow in the field over there, like lying on its side, well, that's a lot less important to be skeptical about than a claim about like economic policy or something like that. Or a claim about like there's a nation invading ours. Like that's a different claim to be a different level of skepticism, right? Because there's more importance in your ignoring. But ultimately, you can't just, for example, right? Like if somebody runs up to you and is like, there's a country invading ours, if you're one of the skeptical, if you believe in skepticism the way that I'm describing other people as believing it, then you would say, well, I don't see the army, there's no evidence of it, so therefore it doesn't exist and I'm not going to do anything about it. It's like, well, okay, but what if they're actually telling the truth and then you get invaded and get killed or something? Ultimately, what skepticism is about is it's not about verifying or not verifying a claim. It's about pursuing more evidence, I think. It's about saying, well, I don't think there's enough evidence to support that, so I'm going to not form an opinion, and I'm going to seek out more information so that I can form an opinion. Because that's really an important question, I guess. Is assuming the converse, no, not the converse, I guess the negation. In mathematics, assuming the negation is as much of an assumption as assuming the proposition itself, or the, like, preposition. Assuming a claim is as powerful as assuming that the claim is false. I think. At least in my opinion. I mean, there's this Christopher Hitchens quote about that which can be assumed, that which is, like, pushed, which is claimed without evidence, can be dismissed without evidence. Personally, he probably, if I had to go off of what I know of Christopher Hitchens, he probably would have, if I asked, like, what do you mean by dismissed, probably would have said that you assume that it's false, but you could also interpret dismissing a claim as not assuming it's true. Because not assuming something to be true is not the same thing as assuming it's false. It's just not the same thing. Because there's the middle ground. You can be neutral about a claim. You need not have an opinion on the claim at all. And the only opinion you're then making is not about the claim, but about the evidence of the claim. If you make the opinion about the claim, then that's sort of just wrong. But by not having an opinion on the claim, you're making an opinion about the evidence. You're saying that there isn't enough evidence. And so you're remaining neutral on the claim. Because again, what evidence is there that numbers exist? I probably could keep talking about this, but basically let me know if you guys are interested in videos like this, where I'm sort of just discussing. I really have no idea what to put in the background, so if you enjoy watching me do this, this is Sam, let me know, because it's kind of fun. I haven't done this in years. But there's other videos, ideas that I have in mind for things like this, like talking about the scientific method and just other things. I will like try to not get like explicitly political, but if I do, I'll always try and take it from a very introspective viewpoint, where it's like, I'm very much trying to see if I'm wrong. Because again, this is just thoughts. These are just my thoughts. This is what I think. It doesn't mean that it's right, and you shouldn't just believe anything because I say it. You should be skeptical of me, because I'm just a guy on the internet. But if what I'm saying makes sense to you, then cool. but keep thinking about it yourself and try and tear it apart and see if you can find counter arguments. Because that's essentially how you come to the truth. I kind of want to finish this sand, but yeah. I hope you guys enjoyed. If I make other videos like this, I'll see you in the next one. Otherwise, maybe check out my other content if you're interested in it.